Thank you for joining us once at the Grave Diary. Today we bring to you 3 creepy tales of hitchhiking gone wrong. Remember your mom always telling you to never pick up hitchhikers? Well, these tales will tell you why you should have listened to her. So sit back, try to relax, and enjoy these tales.
The rain wasn't falling so much as it was attacking, a horizontal, wind-driven assault that turned my windshield into a blurry mess. My high beams did little against the wall of water on the dark, rural route cutting through the state forest. I was white-knuckling the steering wheel, leaning forward, searching for the faint glow of the dashed center line. That's when I saw him. A figure, stark and solitary, standing under the skeletal branches of a large oak. No coat, just a dark jacket soaked through, plastered to his frame. His thumb was out, a pale hook in the gloom. I'd never picked up a hitchhiker before. Every instinct, every true crime podcast I'd ever listened to screamed at me to drive past. But the brutality of the storm, the sheer loneliness of his figure, something made my foot ease off the accelerator. I pulled over just past him, the tires crunching on the wet gravel shoulder. The passenger lock clicked open. The door swung shut, and the car was filled with the smell of wet wool and cold earth. "Thanks," he muttered, his voice a low rasp. "Didn't think anyone would stop." "No problem," I said, pulling back onto the road. "Rough night to be walking. Where you headed?" "Just up the road a ways," he said, not looking at me. He was rubbing his hands together, but I noticed something strange. He wasn't shivering, not even a tremble despite being drenched to the bone. The conversation died. The only sounds were the thump of the wipers, the howl of the wind, and the squelch of his wet clothes against my leather seats. The silence grew heavy, uncomfortable. I reached for the radio knob to fill it. A blast of static. I twisted the tuner. More static. Every single station, just hissing white noise. "Reception's bad out here," I said, more to myself than to him. "Always is," he replied softly. I chanced a glance his way. He was staring straight ahead, his profile pale and gaunt in the dashboard lights. His hands were still now, resting on his knees. That's when I saw the state of his jeans. They were caked in dark, dried mud, all the way up to the knees, as if he'd been wading through a swamp. My grip tightened on the wheel. The podcast voices in my head were yelling now. This was a mistake. A huge mistake. We drove in silence for another 5 minutes, the tension in the car thickening. I just wanted to get to the gas station at the crossroads, a tiny island of light, still 10 miles away. "You can let me out here," he said suddenly. I looked around. We were in the deepest, blackest part of the woods. There was nothing. No houses, no driveways, just the tunnel of trees carved by my headlights. "Here? There's nothing here, man. I can take you further." "Here's fine," he said, his voice firmer, leaving no room for argument. Relieved, I pulled over. The lock clicked again. He pushed the door open and stepped out into the deluge. "Thanks for the ride," he said, leaning back in. And for the first time, he looked directly at me. His eyes were pale, almost colorless gray, and they held a depth of emptiness that made my blood run cold. Then he closed the door and turned, not walking up the road, but directly into the impenetrable wall of the forest. I sat there for a full minute, heart hammering, trying to process what had just happened. I finally put the car in drive, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. He was already gone, swallowed by the night. It was only when I looked down that I saw it. On the passenger seat floor mat, a patch of wet, dark earth was soaking into the fabric, and sitting in the middle of it, perfectly placed, was a single long, rusty old railroad spike. I slammed on the brakes, my whole body trembling. I looked back, nothing but empty, rain-lashed road. I drove the rest of the way to the gas station in a terrified daze. I practically ran inside, the bell on the door jangling wildly. The old clerk looked up from his newspaper. "Rough night out there," he said. You won't believe it," I stammered, still catching my breath. "I just picked up the weirdest hitchhiker back there. Pale guy, soaking wet, didn't shiver, made me let him out in the middle of nowhere." The clerk's face went slack. He slowly lowered his paper. "Son," he said, his voice low, "you're the third person to come in here saying that this month." He leaned forward on the counter. "The thing is, that stretch of road you're talking about, it was a rail line 50 years ago. A train derailed in a storm just like this one. One of the box cars, it was filled with these spikes. They never found one of the brakemen. They said he was washed away in the flood that followed." He looked past me, out into the dark, rainy night. "They say he's still trying to find his way back to the tracks."
The Arizona sun was a hammer on the roof of my old Bronco, and the two-lane black top that cut through the Navajo Nation reservation wavered in the heat. I was driving back from a photography trip, my mind on the shots of Monument Valley I'd gotten, the dust and the silence still clinging to me. That's when I saw her. An elder woman, her face a beautiful map of deep lines, was standing by the side of the road. She wasn't waving me down, she was just standing there, her posture straight and still, a small woven bag at her feet. She wore a traditional dark velvet skirt and a brightly colored blouse, and her silver hair was tied back. To stop felt like the most natural thing in the world. It felt less like a choice and more like an instruction. I pulled over and leaned across to open the passenger door. A wave of dry, hot air rushed in. "Hello," I said. "Do you need a ride?" She looked at me, her dark eyes holding a depth that seemed to quiet the entire desert. She nodded slowly, picked up her bag, and got in. She moved with a grace that belied her age, settling into the seat and placing the bag on her lap. She smelled of sage and dry earth. "Thank you," she said, her voice like the sound of rocks gently shifting in a stream. "Of course. Where are you headed?" She pointed a slender hand ahead down the endless road, just up this way, to the meeting of the rocks. I nodded, though I didn't know what that meant. I pulled back onto the asphalt. The silence she brought with her wasn't awkward. It was immense and peaceful. The commercial country station I'd had on suddenly crackled and died into a hiss of static. I went to fiddle with it, but she placed a gentle, cool hand on my wrist. Her touch was surprisingly cool in the stifling heat. "It is better to listen," she said softly. So we drove in silence. The only sound was the hum of the tires and the wind whistling through my slightly open window. The red mesas and scrublands stretched out to a horizon that seemed forever away. I found my own thoughts slowing down, my grip on the wheel relaxing. I'd never felt so simultaneously small and so completely at peace. After about 20 minutes, she spoke again. "You can let me out here." I looked around. We were in a vast, empty stretch. The only feature was a single, gnarled juniper tree growing at a crazy angle near the side of the road, its bark bleached white by the sun. "Here?" I asked. "There's nothing here." "Here is everything," she replied, a faint smile touching her eyes. I pulled over. She opened the door herself and stepped out. Before she closed it, she leaned in and looked directly at me. "You are on the right road. Don't fear the quiet. It is when you hear the most." She closed the door and didn't walk down the road. She simply turned and walked straight out into the desert, her figure becoming small against the immense landscape,
I watched until she disappeared behind a rise. I sat there for a moment, the car idling, her words echoing in the new silence. I felt a profound sense of calm. I looked down at the passenger seat and saw she had left a single, perfect eagle feather on the fabric. A week later, back in Phoenix, I was telling the story to a friend who worked at the Heard Museum. I described the woman, her clothes, the exact stretch of road. He listened intently, then grew quiet. He said, "That's an old story around here. They say sometimes a spirit guide appears to travelers who are lost, not in place, but in spirit. She appears to offer comfort, to remind people of the old ways. But she was so real, I insisted." He said, "I'm sure she was. The story says she was a medicine woman who died decades ago, walking that same road to help a sick child in the next town. She never made it. They say she still walks it, helping those who need it in a different way." He looked at the eagle feather I'd placed on his desk. "And she always leaves a feather behind, a sign you were listened to." It wasn't a scary story, but the truth of it, the deep, eerie comfort of it, has stayed with me longer than any fear ever could. I still have the feather, and on quiet nights, I can still smell the scent of sage on the desert air.
The rain was a solid sheet, turning the Midwest backroad into a muddy river. My wipers fought a losing battle. That's when I saw him, a lone figure under a flickering streetlight, thumb out. He looked soaked, desperate. Against my guts screaming no, I pulled over. He slid in, dripping water everywhere. "Thanks, man," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "Name's Carl." He was gaunt, with hollow eyes that didn't seem to focus on anything. We drove in silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. "You're a real lifesaver. Last guy who kicked me up wasn't so friendly." He chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. I forced a smile. "Oh yeah?" "Yeah, big guy. Thought he was tough." Carl reached into his jacket pocket. I flinched, my hands tightening on the wheel. He pulled out a wrinkled pack of cigarettes. "Mind?" "I'd rather you didn't," I said, my voice tight. He put them away, his movements slow, deliberate. "It's all right." He stared out the window. "He pulled over just up this road a ways. Thought he was gonna hurt me. He was wrong." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the rain. My eyes darted to the radio. Static. Every station. What happened?" I asked, against my better judgment. Carl turned those hollow eyes on me. A faint, cold smile played on his lips. He patted the large, worn duffel bag at his feet. It made a heavy, metallic clunk. My blood went cold. Collection. The name. Carl. The stories on the news for weeks. The missing truckers. The suspected hitchhiker. "You know," he said, conversationally, "people see a guy like me, they think victim. They never see it coming." He looked straight ahead. "You can let me out here." We were on a deserted stretch, surrounded by cornfields. Nowhere. I didn't argue. I just pulled over, my heart hammering against my ribs. He got out, slung his heavy duffel bag over his shoulder. He leaned back in before closing the door, his face inches from mine. "Drive safe now," he whispered. "And remember, you never know who you're picking up." He slammed the door and vanished into the downpour. I sat there frozen for a full minute before I stomped on the gas, skidding back onto the road. I didn't look back. I drove straight to the state police post, shaking so hard I could barely speak. When I finished my frantic story, the trooper behind the desk went very still. He pulled out a binder, flipped it open, and pointed to a sketch. The gaunt face, the hollow eyes. It was him. "Carl Panzram," the trooper said, his voice grim. "One of the most vicious sprees in history. But son, he's been dead for nearly 100 years." I stared at him,
my world tilting. The trooper pushed the binder toward me. Under the sketch, the dates were clear: 1891, 1930. You're the third driver to describe that exact man on that exact road this year. He always has the duffel bag. He always tells the same story. I never picked up a hitchhiker again, because some evil doesn't die. It just waits by the side of the road, forever looking for a ride.